Senate names 45 confirmed ministerial nominees to the presidency, exclude El-Rufai and others. President Bola Tinubu meets Director General of World Trade Organization, Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, in Abuja. Ganduje presides over first National Working Committee meeting as APC chairman. And on the foreign scene, Niger's military junta refuses to host ECOWAS, cites safety risks. And South African government orders release of taxis after violent strikes. These are the headlines we're monitoring at this hour right here on News Central Television. On Politics HQ tonight, we'll have discussions on Nigeria's federal cabinet. This is as the Senate earlier this evening transmitted the names of 45 confirmed ministerial nominees to the presidency. Now, in Edo State, it's been a low love-lost relationship between Governor Godwin Obaseki and his deputy, Philip Shoaibu. Of course, we'll look at what this means for the future of politics in Edo State ahead of the 2024 governorship election. Our guest tonight on Politics HQ, Dayo Akintobi, is a public affairs analyst. He joins us from London, the United Kingdom. We also have Manji Wilson, a governance expert, joining us from Abuja. And later on, we'll be joined for the Edo discussion by Dennis Osareti. He's a legal practitioner. He will join us live from the capital of Edo State, the city of Benin. Stay with us. Politics HQ. We'll be right back. TV. Let's go to a first discussion. The Nigerian Senate has approved the appointment of 45 of the 48 ministerial nominees submitted by the President Bola Tinubu, a former FCT minister and former Kaduna State Governor Nasir El-Rufai, and two other ministerial nominees, Stella Okotete and Sani Danladi, have had their ministerial nominations withheld for the time being, as the Senate has asked that a security check be conducted on the three nominees. Now, the nominees have faced the Senate and they have defended themselves at various screenings that have been held. Now, although some ministerial nominees, including Bosun Tijani, a foremost technology entrepreneur and former Minister of State for Labor and Employment, Festus Keyamo SAN, were scrutinized over their past comments and actions, almost all the ministers passed their screening at the National Assembly. With portfolios yet to be allocated to the nominees, Nigerians are watching on to see who gets what. Well, tonight we look at the dust raised by Festus Keyamo's screening at the exclusion of three of Mr. President's nominees, and we also analyze the overall process. Joining us tonight for this conversation, I'd like to welcome public affairs analyst Dayo Akintobi, joining us from London, the United Kingdom. Dayo, good evening to you.
A very good evening to you and good evening to all our viewers. Thank you for having me.
We also have governance expert Manji Wilson, who joins us all the way from Abuja. Manji, good evening to you.
Good evening, Kofi. Thank you. It's nice to be here.
All right. Let's start with you, Dayo. The Senate has just, as you already heard me say, concluded the process of screening President Bola Tinubu's nominees for ministerial positions, with the final screening of the second batch of nominees, which held yesterday. Now, what's your assessment of the entire process?
Well, the process has been quite disappointing because we actually expected that the Senate would be more rigorous in its scrutiny. And I say an overwhelming majority of those who are screened basically just got a bow and go. Their feet were not held to the fire to the point of being able to x-ray their performance in public or private in the past, their competence, their integrity, their character. The Senate is supposed to speak on behalf of the Nigerian people and make sure that the people the president is putting forward to work with him for the betterment of Nigerians are the cream of the crop. Granted, 3 of them have been sidelined for now because of questionable security clearances and some outstanding issues. But out of the 45 that were passed, I don't think the level of scrutiny rose to the point where we can satisfactorily say that we got the very best of the best. As you know, we have a mix of technocrats and politicians. They all have public or private sector records that could have, I wanted a lot more scrutiny. For example, the kind of questions that were brought to Festus Keyamo by the Labour Party senator from Abia State and the APGA senator as well. Those kind of really burning questions that spoke to the things they have done in the past. I didn't see that with many of the other nominees, and that was rather disappointing, to tell you the truth.
All right. I'll go over to you, Manji Wilson. Your own assessment of the entire process. I mean, it's been carried live on national TV from the first batch to the second batch. Were you impressed by what you saw on the floor of the Senate at that committee of the whole? Manji Wilson, do we still have you, please? All right, we'll try to get Manji. I'm sure we have some difficulty there. We continue with Dayo Akintobi, a public affairs analyst in the UK. Dayo, you've expressed support or happiness at the way the senators grilled Festus Keyamo. Maybe to an extent also the likes of Malam Nasir El-Rufai, and then a gentleman who also is the tech guru as well, who was screened right there at the Senate. But let's go over to Festus Keyamo's situation for now. He is a lawyer. He's a senior advocate of Nigeria. He's quite controversial and somewhat divisive character in Nigeria's politics in recent times. Now, yesterday, he gave a glowing account of his achievements as a lawyer and also as a government minister while reading his profile to the senators. He talked about his contribution to Nigeria's pro-democracy struggle in the days of Nadeko, where he said he was a lawyer, a junior lawyer, and he was empaneled under the late Chief Gani Fawemi. Do you think Festus Keyamo deserves the credit or gets the credit he deserves, looking at the stick he's received because he's made a foray into partisan politics?
Well, without a doubt, Festus Keyamo has a lot of intellectual acumen. His mental acumen is not in question. That he's probably one of the most brilliant of the people put forward by the president. But the thing that we need to understand, especially from the way he beat his chest about his portfolio and the things he has achieved as a lawyer and as a politician, as a minister, is that he started out, as you said, under the tutelage of Gani Fawemi. He started out as an activist, a pro-democracy activist. He cut his teeth fighting government. He cut his teeth fighting human rights and civil rights abuses. He came to prominence and fame and acclaim based on the fact that he stood for the common man. Now, the way it now looks, such people generally don't cross over to become a part of government, because ultimately you are now roping in with the very people or the very sector that you made your name fighting against. So there's a contradiction in terms when you see a human rights crusader who all he lives for is to hold government accountable and hold government's feet to the fire, who now seems to cross the carpet and now go and become a part of the very people he made his name criticizing. So I already had that issue with Festus Keyamo, and I would also have the same issue with Femi Falana or any of the other human rights.
Sorry to interrupt you, Dayo, but Festus Keyamo,
yes,
he made a point to say that when Bola Tinubu was abroad on exile in the United States of America. Let's not go there, because some of that is subject of a court case in Chicago, so we won't get there. But he made a point to say that when Bola Tinubu was on exile in the United States of America, that he was here fighting for democracy. Now, this is the democracy Nigerians are enjoying, that Festus fought for. Has Festus all of a sudden become a bad person because he decided to become a member of a party and take a government appointment?
No, no, we're not saying he's become a bad person, but we're saying that you can't play on both sides of the fence. You either belong here or you belong there, because your ideology should be grounded in principle. And so if it is the ideology of being a human rights crusader or a fighter for the masses, it then becomes a bit difficult for you to maintain that stance while you are actively playing politics, where politics is all about self-interest or very narrow interest. It's very difficult to serve the interest of the people at large while you say you're a human rights crusader. Nonetheless, let's give Festus his due. The main problem he had, as far as I can see, is the fact that in his last appearance as a minister, he probably allowed the position to go a bit too much to his head, and he became quite arrogant and a bit haughty. And he took that into the hallowed chamber of the Senate. And of course, there's this thing called institutional memory. They were waiting for him when he came back this time around, and they held his feet to the fire, correctly so, because he basically besmirched the institution in his first coming and didn't expect that they would just overlook that and give him a pass. So these are the larger issues to do with Festus. Let's even forget his background, or let's put that aside, because obviously President Tinubu was impressed with the role he played as one of his key spokespersons during the campaign. And so the president is rewarding him by paying him back for the role he played, which is political. That's the way politics works. It's all about a quid pro quo. So we can't fault the president for putting him forward. He didn't win the election on his own. A lot of other people had to work with him to get him to where he is today. And so he must take those people into consideration. And I think Festus Keyamo is a beneficiary of such largesse, but it's also based on the fact that the president believes he has the competence. I gave credence to his mental acuity earlier. So by and large, I think it was a humbling experience for him before the Senate yesterday, and it goes to show that we should be careful. Same thing with Bosun Tijani and even El Rufai, for that matter, whose confirmation is being held up. These are based on the things that they have all said or done in the past. That's not coming back to haunt them.
All right.
The internet doesn't forget.
Thank you. Dayo, very interesting. Yeah. You're very interesting. You said talk about humbling. The people on Twitter, or X as it's called these days, now saying that Nigerian politics will humble you. But let me bring in Manji Wilson at this point. Manji, thanks for your time again. You're a governance expert. Were you impressed with the way the process was carried out, especially looking at the role the Senate president played, in making sure that everybody was listened to and everything was done, in a somewhat peaceful manner?
Thank you for that question, Kofi. Well, I wouldn't probably draw a conclusion on whether I was impressed, or not, about the process, but of course, following through what had, happened for the confirmation of these ministers, or the screening process, of these ministers, I think, of course, the Senate tried to follow its standing rules, and procedure on how it normally screens nominations, as has been sent or transmitted by the presidency. Of course, when you are a public office holder that has held office prior to a subsequent nomination, you may you may find yourself in a situation where you are much more interrogated, to others that may have not been in the same position as you. And this may have been, of course, the situation with the likes of the former Minister Festus Keyamo and Ministerial and the rest that were held into account for, of course, their stewardship when they occupied, previous public posts. Of course, there are others that had, held, public office, but probably were not as visible as they were, and this may have led to, the variance in terms of the intensity of questions, or resistance, even acceptability that they had from one, nominee to another. Of course, what I would have, or would love to see is a process where these nominations would happen several days, of course, before, and probably these CVs transmitted to the Senate with also accounts of stewardship, so they could be able to prepare, ahead of time, and have enough questions to throw at these nominees. But the way it is, of course, once the president translates or transmits these nominations, you see that the National Assembly quickly go into the process of screening these nominees. And this may not give them enough time to interrogate, the competencies of qualifications of these individuals that are being put forth to occupy public office.
Interesting, Manji. It has been, suggested, because we know that before now in the Buhari administration, Buhari years, you were not required, or there was no 60-day, provision in the Constitution for the president to submit names. They had the alteration, the amendment to the Constitution, and that was inserted. Manji, do you think we need to see more amendments to a further amendment to the Nigerian Constitution to ensure that the portfolios of the nominees are allocated to them and clearly spelled out in the letter transmitted from the presidency to the Senate before the screening?
No, I think it would make a lot of sense, because this would actually allow targeted, questions for each nominee, as against the current, practice of throwing, questions randomly across several thematic issues. Basically, of course, oftentimes it is related to either the area of study of the nominee, or probably an office the nominee has held, previously. I don't think there's a need to amend the time. You can see that, of course, the elections were held in February, and a winner emerged. After the winner emerged, you had close to more than 2 months, more than 60 days before the swearing in of the president. And I would assume that during that period, beyond receiving, congratulatory messages or courtesy calls, on your emergence as the winner of the election, you should be preparing to take over office. And this is the period that public office holders, whether the president or governors or whoever, contested for an election, should strategize on who would constitute, the cabinet to work with. So I think the issue is that there has not been intentionality, by public office holders to put together a strategy that would allow them have their team in place, and you would see them rush to meet up deadlines like the 60 days, and we got towards that period before the names were transmitted to the National Assembly. I think we should begin to do better, as a people, where public office holders, the moment you win elections, you begin to strategize, you put your team together, identify the resources, the individuals that you are supposed to work with, and of course, when you transmit that name, if possible, transmit them with the portfolios that they should, or they would probably be occupying. Let's not forget, there was a time before the election when the president was at the Chatham House and questions were thrown at him. And he also had people, some of his members of his entourage, and he said, you would be responsible for this, so you respond to that question, you'd be responsible for that, and this was long before the elections. So if that had happened before the election, you would have expected that just before the swearing in, the entire portfolio of cabinet should have been probably identified, probably barring the exception of a few, and eventually transmitted with the exact portfolio that these individuals would be occupying, so that it will also allow for a proper assessment of their competence or qualification to be able to carry out these mandates that they are given.
All right. Before I go back to Dayo, Manji, just a quick thought on the how do I call it now, the ordeal that Festus Keyamo was put through right there at the National Assembly. Before I go to the next question, your thoughts on that? Do you feel the senator got what he deserved?
Well, what I would say is, when you are a public office holder, you are not assessed only based on your competence to deliver, but also on your character and your conduct in office. You would see again that both himself, the former Governor El Rufai, and a few others that have held, public office, were held accountable for their conduct and character while in office. A lot of questions were raised to that aspect, and this is a key lesson for every individual aspiring for office. I think you must get to a point where you become self-aware, so that you are also able to exhibit a measure of self-control when need be. When you are also able to look at the aspect of emotional intelligence, it will help you to becoming someone that is socially aware of how you are able to conduct your affairs. The simple case between the former minister and the Senate is just on the roles of various institutions. Of course, when he was an executive council member, as a minister at the time, and when they had also were trying to perform their, task of oversight on institutions, and called, for his presence to offer some explanations, which he didn't, respond to, and they really felt that their ego, the ego of the institution of the National Assembly was bruised, because both the House of Representatives and the Senate, had made that call. And like Bayo, mentioned earlier, they were basically waiting for him to come so that they would take their own pound of flesh. So it is quite important and integral that public office holders are able to conduct themselves in a way that is quite honorable, because you are no longer there in your individual capacity. Whatever institution you hold, it's in trust of the public, and every single step you take is being monitored, not just by institutions that are supervising you like the National Assembly, but also the citizenry that you have a social contract with.
All right. Okay. Let's go back to Dio. And interesting, both of you are of the same opinion that Senators Darlington Wokocha, Labour Party, Abia Central, and of course we have also Senator Yinaya Baribe of Labour Party, Abia South. You're both of the opinion that they both were right. But I mean, if we take a trip down memory lane, we go to the heated public hearing in the year 2020 when Buhari was still president and Festus Keyamo was the Minister of State for Labor and Employment. That very heated public hearing in 2020 by the Senate and House of Representatives Joint Committee on Labor, which I know both of you remember, which invited Keyamo to give details of the special public works program where 774,000 people would be recruited by the federal government under the DND program, the National Directorate of Employment program. Now, when it got to the issue of the selection for the 20-man committee from each state for the program, the Joint Committee decided they wanted to go into a closed-door session in camera, to discuss modalities with Festus Keyamo, who refused blatantly, vehemently, insisting that further discussions on the issue must be held in the presence of journalists. We all know that, this enraged the lawmakers who told him to apologize. He refused to apologize, saying he wasn't wrong to insist that the hearing must continue in the presence of journalists who were there. Because he said, this is a public hearing. Why do you want to drive the journalists away? Now, do you think yesterday's action, maybe to a little extent, yesterday's action by the senators was a revenge mission of sorts? Because it sounds like you're all saying that, Dio, you talked about institutional memory. If that is the case, then it certainly means that this is a revenge mission. So are the senators right, to allow their personal issues with the nominee influence his screening for a position that is for the entire Nigeria? Dio?
Well, see, the thing is that the way the senators saw it, Festus cast aspersion on their integrity. Essentially, as far back as you were saying about that hearing in 2019, he was already accusing them of wanting to hijack the process, wanting to put in their own people, their party favorites, their ward chairman, and he felt he basically besmirched their character publicly in front of the whole nation.
But Dio, I know you're in the UK, but you're very, very informed about Nigerian politics. We all know the Off the Mic episode with Godson Lakpabio and co. We know what's been going on. I mean, we've had scandals right from even El Rufai and co. This is the senator talking about. Are you surprised that such an allegation would come from a minister of the Federal Republic?
By the way, let me correct you. I'm only in the UK on holiday. I don't live here. I'm actually based in Nigeria and do this for a living from Nigeria. So it's par for the course for me to know what is happening in Nigeria on a day-by-day basis. Anyway, so yeah, of course, this has been an issue within our political system for a very long time, but that doesn't mean we have to settle for less. It doesn't mean we have to be accepting of things that are untoward. Nonetheless, no matter how the senators position themselves, the point is that power, you have to give due credit and due respect to the masters that you serve. The senators speak for the people of Nigeria. Festus Keyamo worked for the president. He's doing the president's bidding. But the senators and the House of Representatives have the mandate of all Nigerians. They are the ones who are standing in the gap for us. So if they say, Festus, this is how we want to get this done, even if there's a misunderstanding, there's a way to achieve rapprochement in a way that doesn't cast aspersion on the integrity of the representatives of the people of Nigeria. I wouldn't have taken it lightly if I were a senator either, no matter what my underlying motives were, no matter what my objectives were, even if it's self-serving, as long as I'm presenting myself as a representative of my people, and it is their mandate that I am carrying, I will not accept from a Festus Keyamo to publicly call me names. So even though at that point in time, there was little they could do about it, but they extracted their pound of flesh yesterday, which is not surprising at all. Let's not sweep it under the rug by saying, oh, this is business as usual. This is the way it is in politics.
But the question I'm asking you is, exacting
Yes.
or extracting your pound of flesh for an exercise
Yes.
that is meant to produce ministers for Nigeria, does this not amount
Yes.
to turning a national exercise, to a personal revenge mission of sorts?
We don't know that. You are speculating. How do we know that it's not that the senators
you just said it.
Hold on. How do you know that it's not that the senators want to make sure that any minister who is coming in will subject himself to oversight of the Senate? They don't want the kind of a situation where they are in a stalemate or a logjam because a minister down the road will say, I'm not answering your summons, like Festus did in the last administration. So it could very well be that they don't want a repeat of that situation. It doesn't necessarily have to be vengeance or revenge. It could simply be all about making sure that the nominees or future cabinet members are people who will subject themselves to oversight of the Nigerian people. It could simply be that. We don't know for a fact that it was revenge at all. It's Festus's record that is coming back to haunt him now because he has shown a propensity.
Right.
He demonstrated a propensity to disrespect those who are in charge of oversight of his ministry. And so that probably was what the senators were worried about.
Okay, Manji, what's your take on this?
Well, I would say, of course, across the media space, the media landscape, like you mentioned earlier on X, former Twitter now, or even the traditional mainstream media, you could see that public opinion has sort of tilted to the angle that you have, quite raised now. Indeed, and the narrative around the fact that the senators have, or the Senate.
Manji, can you hear me, please? All right, we seem to be having a network issue with Manji. Okay, while we try to reestablish connection with Manji, let's go back to you, Dayo. A very interesting thoughts you've shared. What are your thoughts on the fact that the Senate failed to confirm, the nomination of the immediate past governor of Kaduna State, Nasir El-Rufai, Malam Nasir El-Rufai, on account of an issue to do with security clearance, and also, two others? And what do you think his chances are of scaling through this so-called security clearance issue?
Nasir El-Rufai's problems began when a video began circulating a couple of months ago on social media that showed him propounding highly divisive rhetoric. He was borderline hate speech against Christians. He basically was more or less playing the religious card. And as we know, Kaduna State has been a theater of killings throughout his 8-year tenure, especially southern Kaduna, which is predominantly Christian. And El-Rufai, ever since his days in the BPE, has been viewed as a technocrat who was relatively moderate. He was seen as a cosmopolitan intellectual. And so it shocked people when they began to hear this kind of hate speech and divisive rhetoric that basically painted him as a religious bigot. And the outcry, especially because his record in office in terms of security is abysmal. If you look at the numbers in Kaduna, I would say probably has one of the largest amounts of loss of life over the tenure of the Buhari administration. And they're not looking at it from the standpoint of the fact that perhaps Governor Rufai was stoking the flame, stoking the fire all this time, but it was, towards the end of his tenure, after he left office, that this video started circulating. So there are issues. How much did he support the terrorism? If you read between the lines of what he was saying publicly, and they had people go and check to make sure that they didn't use artificial intelligence to clone his voice, or it wasn't fake news. They authenticated the video that was him, that those were his thoughts, and he espoused his beliefs.
Dayo, thank you so much. I apologize, I have to interject there, but thank you so much. We look forward to having you again. Very interesting analysis from you. Dayo Akintobi is a public affairs analyst. He joined us from London, where he's on vacation. Look forward to having you in the studio when you return to Nigeria, Dayo. And Manji Wilson, governance expert, who joined us from Abuja. Gentlemen, thank you very much for your time.